Hello, my name's Dr. Anton Lewis, and I'm a Black British Associate Professor of Accounting in the College of Business at Valparaiso University. And I'm here to talk about race and racism in accounting, because we kind of hear a lot about this in the news and in the media these days, and I'm a critical race theorist in accounting, so I think I'm relatively well placed to kind of have this discussion. This is my research area. And in our particular session today, I want to explore with you why I think we need to do more and be more in our quest for a better account of Black accounting. So, I guess I should outline a few talking points to give you a kind of overview, if you like. For me, over the last few decades, we have seen very little progress for Black accounting since its inception. I also want to cover this idea that is quite common when I bring up the subject of race and racism in accounting circles, both within the academy and in industry. One of the most common refrains happens to be, well, does race in accounting really even matter? We are a technocracy. We deal in impartial, cold facts and figures. But putting that aside for a second, even if we do believe that this idea and notion of race and racism accounting, perhaps wrapped up in some of the diversity, equity and inclusion talk that we've heard of late, if it does have a place, what exactly should we do about it? So, let me begin. I want to maybe take that first question I posed to you. Does race in accounting really matter? I want to answer that question first, I think. And from my point of view, yes. Emphatically yes. To me, greater Black representation in our profession matters, because just as Black people deserve not to experience racism in society, that they should be able to breathe in every space in this land, freely and unmolested. I believe that our Black accounting professionals deserve exactly the same in our profession, and it's down to all of us to make sure that this is the case, and frankly, always has been, or at least should have been. And for me, when we look at it at that particular frame, a frame of social justice, I believe that no one really disagrees with this. I think everybody wants to minimise the harm that has traditionally befallen our Black colleagues, particularly our Black colleagues in our profession. I mean, I would challenge anybody to openly disagree with that. But here's the rub. Accounting, over at least the last half a century in the US, has pretty much failed Black accountants. I would say right up to the current day. From outright prejudice and Jim Crow obstacles right up to today. And I know you're thinking, but things are better today. Are they? Let me throw some figures your way, so to speak. In Professor Teresa Hammond's book, A White Collar Profession, she highlights figures from 1997 that note just under 1% of Black CPAs existed then, which was a paltry number back in the mid-90s. Now let's kind of go forward a little to 2019. And we should have seen significant progress, right? We know about some of the historical barriers that have occurred with Black professionals, and we've had some talk about diversity and inclusion during the 1990s, where Black CPAs are concerned. We should see more. Well, the AICPA's own figures from reports that it has produced in 2019 states that Black CPAs, qualified CPAs, are around 2% in the United States, which is pretty terrible considering the passage of time from 1997. Further, this same 2019 report, cites that less than 1% of Black partners exist also. When you take these together, it really does spell poor progress, considering the amount of time that's passed. So why is this the case? Why have we managed to miss the mark so consistently? I believe a main cause of this paltry figure of 2% of black accountants and around 1% of black partners, I believe that it's an outright denial of racial practice within the walls of accounting. And in truth, I feel like a broken record on repeat about this. I seem to mention it every time I write, be it for various articles published in the CPA journal, or whether I'm publishing in my books that I write on this subject area, or whether in my podcast Counting Black and White Beans I mention it episode after episode, or whether I'm writing academic journals about this area. I keep having to point out that institutional racism has and also does exist within our profession. But the rub is, we seldom admit it, not just to one another, but to the world at large. And the problem is, well, if you don't recognise a problem, how can you deal with it? And so, in a sense, this stain of institutional racism, if you like, it remains sticky, attached to our profession, and sadly, for the most part, hidden and unseen, because we do not want to see it on the whole. Think about this. For the most part, Big Four firms are happy to sell diversity services to other businesses. But the question I raise, the question that I ask is, what about their own backyard? True, some Big Four firms, such as PwC, Tim Ryan has done a great job, the US CEO, of beginning to issue racial metrics, and in some of my writings you'll see my take on that. But for the other three, I'm not really seeing enough, and I'm not seeing enough consistency, and I certainly don't hear them openly admitting, looking at the dark recesses of accounting within their own organisations, where this actually exists, and in particular what they choose to attempt to do to mitigate it. They won't openly admit that it exists or that they have any wrongdoings in this area, and I think that's actually a problem. So the more I think about this, the more it seems to occur to me, could it be that our profession depends so much upon being the unbiased arbiter of facts and figures that the very notion or idea of racial bias might actually fundamentally undermine the trust that society has in the work that we do? That could be a real fundamental problem. And in the readings that I do about diversity, equity, inclusion, where the Big Four firms are concerned, or some of the higher mid-tier firms, or when I look at some of the progress made within the IACPA or the AAA, I don't see that level of introspection. I don't see that level of analysis. I don't see an open admission. And I'm hoping that this is just an oversight. I'm hoping that they've just accidentally missed the mark, because I honestly want to believe that our profession wants to do better. And it certainly, in my opinion, has more to contribute to this very sticky and seemingly eternal problem than it currently does in the debates given so far in the media today and on their websites and in some of the pronouncements that have been given. More importantly, there is a practical element to all of this. No doubt, as many of you will notice, there seem to be less and less graduates of business schools coming into our profession. We have declining numbers, full stop. We're seeing it all across the US. The profession can ill afford to be seen as stale, pale, and male anymore. Not if we need to recruit new blood. And that blood, to my mind, must be that of people of colour across the board. But when I say that, I also want to make very clear here that we're not just talking about people of colour. We're talking about other stigmatised groups. I want to see an increase in the numbers of those from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds. And that means I want to see more very poor whites from the likes of Appalachia and other places included in our profession as well. I also want to see greater representation from our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters. Nor can we forget about women either, who also, in my opinion, aren't populating our profession in anywhere the numbers they need to be, or being paid the same as men for doing exactly the same work. And finally, those who are not able-bodied must also be included. So we must be intersectional in our thinking, and yet not contribute our set, sometimes meagre resources to all these differing, varying groups in a kind of oppression Olympics, where the most attractive, stigmatized group of any period, any year, wins the most resources. And before you think that that's a ridiculous concept, just bear something in mind, that traditionally, white women overall have been the largest recipients of affirmative action in the past, and therefore white women have certainly seen much greater progress in the accounting sphere than really either blacks or Latinx professionals that we know of, just to highlight two groups of people of colour. To my mind, we must have policies, we must have action, we must have a strategy that seeks to be a tide that raises all ships together so that all may be equitable in their progress fairly through our industry, through our profession. So, you might be wondering, hey clever clogs, how do we do this? As always, my answer remains depressingly consistent, and perhaps depressingly the same. I don't know. I don't know how we do this. For all the writing, for all the reading, for all the thinking, and I do far too much, I don't have any firm answers or strategies. And you know what? It would seem that I'm not alone. And seemingly, the answer that the accounting profession has delivered over the last half a century has been one of near total failure. We should not forget that towards the end of the 1960s, the AICPA noted that there were not enough African American accountants, and that it made pronouncements all those many decades ago to actually changing this situation for the better. And given the numbers that I have cited earlier, it makes it clear that failure has been the only result. And I know it sounds harsh, but that's where we are. And I want us to operate from a benchmark of realism, if you like. I'm not here to rubbish and malign our profession. I'm here to provoke a conversation because I actually care about our profession. I care as much as you do. And I want something that I see as a glaring problem to change. And the only way that I see meaningful change really take hold and really stick and really make sure that we have increased representation of all the groups I've mentioned, including those of black accountants. The only way I see that really working is if we face this together, working hand in hand with one another to foster this real change that's not just window dressing, but is a truly progressive way forward. Some of the ideas I've had around this, and I might be repeating myself from some of my reading, so if you've come across my work before, I do apologise a little. Some of my thinking around this goes to the idea and notion that accounting as an industry, jobbing accountants, must work much more closely with critical accounting scholars, researchers in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and race and racism, like myself, to begin to really deeply explore, not just on a qualitative level, but also on an empirical level, to find out what is going on. Why has this problem bedeviled our profession for so long? And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I mean, that's already being done. But I am one of those scholars, and I'm here to tell you that that really doesn't happen. So for many of the pronouncements that have been made by a number of big four accountancy firms and a number of big tiers, mid-tier firms rather, should I say, You would expect some of us in the area looking at race, racism, diversity, equity, inclusion in the academy to be consulted. We are not. These policies seem to come out of the ether, and that's a problem because essentially we're just throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks. And it would seem, at least since the late 1960s, as I've cited before, that doesn't seem to be working. So we need to try a different tactic. Another avenue we must explore has to be those in the C-suite, those at the various highest partner level, must make themselves aware of the racial world around them and not kid themselves into believing the hocus pocus of colourblindness and fairness in our profession or in business in general. And again, I will call out the CEO of PwC, Tim Ryan, for making progress in this area. Previously, I will also call out KPMG in general for the creation, a couple of decades and a bit ago, of the PhD project, which has done almost more than any other organisation I know to introduce not just accounting professors, but business professors of all types through sponsorship and funding and guidance. It's been doing this for decades and continues to do so. And again, this was instigated by KPMG. So please don't be of the mind that I'm here to consistently attack our profession and not highlight the many good things that have occurred. It's just they're not good enough, and they're not systemic enough, and they're not deep enough. I believe that we in the profession, both on the left and the right, we must stand criticism better in this area, particularly when it comes to accusations of race and racism within our ambit, within our accounting sphere. And yes, that means me. Honestly, you don't have to believe a word that I or other critical researchers in this area say, but at least let your view be known. Enter into a dialogue with myself or others. Challenge perhaps some of the things that you see within your own workplace where DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, is concerned. I'm the chair of our Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee at my College of Business in Valparaiso University. I do nothing but challenge and get challenged by my committee and my colleagues as a whole. It's incredibly useful because even though I may be challenged in a positive way about certain policies and ideas that I have to increase representation in our College of Business, I always respect and value all of my colleagues that do so. And it's that respect that is vital, because without that criticism, we cannot find effective strategies and policies to go forward. We can't even begin to do so. In truth, in general, my maxim tends to be, a voice is not a voice unless it is heard. And so we really need to hear from everybody. Be you a partner, be you a senior manager, be you a starting colleague still sitting your CPA exams, be you a person of colour, or be you dominant majority white, be you male, be you female. We all need to come together to find a way forward, to begin to mitigate some of the harm that has just been far too consistent over far too long. So, essentially, no easy solutions here. Don't believe the hype, as they say. We've heard a lot of pronouncements from a lot of businesses, including many of the big four, and I'm thinking here of the 75 million that Deloitte has put to many good diversity and equity courses, and it's got some great stuff, and I've mentioned some of this in my writings. My fear is that the money that has been pledged and money that is meant to be coming, somewhere in the tune of $1 billion if some of the writing that the journalist in Fortune magazine have cited has been pledged by some of the biggest blue chip companies in the United States. I want to see that there's consistency. I want to see benchmarking. I want to see that the money that's being thrown at this particular problem is actually creating results and not just cover Not just cover to say, well, we threw lots of money at this problem, but, God, it just didn't work. Again, oh well, let's move on to something else. Because that tends to be the modus operandi of what happens here. And that just isn't good enough. Not if we want to make a serious dent into this problematic, this racial harm that does bedevil our industry. Honestly, if society has not made a significant dent in the life chances of Black Americans over the last few hundred years, one may ask themselves, what can accounting do in a couple of years, given those declarations, that flood I've already mentioned? How can they beat it back so quickly? I don't believe it will happen. I believe our commitment will wane. I believe our want to see this end now will dissipate over time, which is why I'm here. It's why I'm speaking in this particular podcast to you. And no, in my opinion, it will be a hard and difficult journey, but I think our noble profession must undertake it, and we must do so together if we wish to make good on the racial promises we've already made. And more importantly, if we do work together, if we do some of the things that I'm suggesting and others, of connecting industry and academia, of making sure that we get right to the deep central cause of some of these problems, I believe we can do this. Because honestly, we are in the business of problem solving, and we are in the business of providing all sorts of financial and other information. If any industry, if any set of professionals can contribute in a meaningful sense, it is us. We just have to do it. Anyway, thank you so much for sticking with me with this. Lastly, I'll maybe outline some takeaways. I think we need an honest admission that we're not doing enough to help and support our Black accounting professionals, even after the unfortunate passing of Mr. George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. After all the promises have been made, what has been done? And I don't think it's enough. We need to be honest about that. And off the back of that, we must be honest that racism, institutional racism, and by that term I mean a racism that exists, inverted commas, without racist. It's racism in the air, subtle, hidden racism that stops the life chances of people of colour, the professional life chances, if you will, without a racist jibe or a racist insult being ever uttered. We must admit that that exists and set our will about reducing it, about stopping it, about making sure that it does not remain within our profession. And finally, talk. We must talk to one another. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I can't say it enough. As I've said just a moment ago, conversations at work, conversations with the AICPA, conversations with the American Accounting Association, the AAA, particularly with the AICPA and the AAA, I must simply ask, where's the leadership on this? In some ways, we've had a lot of platitudes about what should be done, what must be done, but where are the results? And in many ways, I can still accuse many of our big four accountancy firms also of a kind of failure there. Even though we've had many good pronouncements and lots of money and a number of organisations have been created, as time goes on, we're seeing a focus on increasing numbers of Black accountants going into the field here in the US. We're seeing the focus wane, and I think that needs to stop. Equally though, where is the research in accounting academia in our top journals about why this is the case? You would think that diversity, equity and inclusion in our top journals, they would be flooded with analysis. They're not that I've ever seen. Why is that the case? To me, this is how racism sticks. This is how racism becomes unseen and unremarkable and yet unthinkable in our profession. This is how we fail until we find a better way together. Anyhow, thank you for sticking with me. My name's Dr. Anton Lewis. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about what is sometimes quite a difficult subject, but a subject I know accounting professionals up and down the ticket from industry to academe to elsewhere. I know you want to do more. I know we all want to work together to reduce this harm. And I think if we do this, we work together in this manner, if we find a way, we can do some really spectacular things. So on that positive note, I will leave you. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.